Kathy hit. Got it. So this morning, we're joined by the State Auditor's Office to talk about their financial intelligence tool. And we've got Dwayne Walls, who is Data Business Systems Specialist, and Niles Kostic, which is a Financial Management and Tools Specialist. And you don't want to listen to me, so I will turn it over to them.
Thanks, David. Hey, good morning, everybody. Soon to be afternoon here on this Wednesday. Thanks for joining us as we chat about, as David said, the financial intelligence tool, otherwise known as FIT, brought to you by the State Auditor's Office. Specifically, what we wanted to talk about today, as you see here on the title slide, is really how, going back to basics and how financial health ratios can really help tell the story of local governments in our state. Whether you're joining us from a local government or joining us from an agency, it's important to understand really how, these mathematical equations, these ratios, these indicators help construct a larger narrative or help explain the current situation at a local government, and really understanding how to use those tools in the right ways effectively to tell that story. Users right now, for many reasons, are interested in the health of local governments, whether it be related to a pandemic that we all just are going through, or whether you're seeking funding. Financial health is something that everybody, from the public to local governments to lenders to grantors, it's something that everybody's aware of and is looking for ways to really figure out how to put that finger on the pulse. And so we're hoping that this session kind of goes back to those basics and explains really what FIT can provide through the financial health indicators. So some introductions, as David said, my name is Niles with the State Auditor's Office. I'm joined here by my co-presenter, Dwayne. Dwayne's been with the office for 25 some odd years, all throughout his career working with the data that we'll be talking about today. I've been with the office for about 7-8 years now. Again, most of that time working directly with local governments in accounting and reporting, and most recently working with the data alongside Dwayne. So let's just talk some housekeeping things before we go in too far. We will be using the chat feature in Zoom. We're going to be using it a couple of times here just to get some interaction. It's hard enough being separated from all you, so we're going to use the chat feature to try to keep in touch here and have some back and forth going throughout our session. So we'll be using the Zoom chat for that. If you have any questions, as Kathy said, go ahead and use that Zoom chat feature as well. To really test this out, and before we get too far into it, what I wanted to do is just test out the chat feature right now. How we normally do this when Dwayne or I present is we do this approach called the waterfall chat approach. And what we do is when we present a question to you all, which we want you to respond to, go ahead and type in your answer into the Zoom chat, but don't click submit until we instruct you to. And so what this kind of does is hopefully builds up some anticipation, and it kind of allows everybody to see the answers all at once, just as we do. And it also forces nobody to have to go first or wait for that person to go first before people start asking questions and such. So what I wanted to do is just throw out a simple question for you all to try this out and kind of get the feel for it. So this is a simple question. We just want to get to know you all. If you are from a city, I just want you to type in the letter C. If you're from a special purpose district, I just want you to type in the letter D. And if you're from an agency or some other organization, some other group, I just want you to type in A. So C for cities, D for special purpose districts, and A for other groups. And just type it in there. Don't hit enter yet. I'm going to give you a few seconds. When I say go, I want you to hit submit. And hopefully we see a waterfall here. Ready, on your mark, get set, go. Nice. And Dwayne, you're reading this really quickly, right? To see where everybody's from. Yep. Cool. So success, everybody. We did it. Good job. You can leave knowing we did that. We did a good job there. Okay. So that's in large part the housekeeping items. There's one more item which I want to set up for us later today. We know that you're using Socio as well during this conference. And so what I want to have everybody do really quickly is alongside Socio is to open up a new tab. And if you don't have two screens and you don't feel like opening a new tab and switching back and forth, that's okay. You can just follow along. But for those with two screens, I'm going to drop a link in the Zoom chat. Simply open up a new tab, go to that hyperlink in the new tab, and we'll come back to that later today. But we wanted to actually have you go into FIT and take a look at some things with us because we think doing is a lot more effective than just watching and listening to Dwayne or myself talk. Okay, so let's just jump straight into this. Dwayne and I reside for a team called the Center for Government Innovation. We are, the main point of telling you guys this is that Dwayne and I are on a team that focuses on figuring out ways to make government run more efficiently, solve problems, get answers to questions that help them gain confidence in providing services to the people that they need to. There's a whole list of things that we do, including FIT, that we're going to talk about today. But just know that, if there's a question or a problem that you are needing solved, the center probably can help you with that. And we'll give a link to an email at the very end to contact us. That's the main gist here. The second thing that we need to know is what is FIT that we're talking about. For those that may be new to the local government financial world, FIT is the financial intelligence tool, and it's really our office's way of accomplishing the statutory requirement to collect financial data from every government and then republish that data so that the public has access to it in a comparative global way. So it's simply our way of meeting statutory requirements that the public thought long time ago, this is probably a good idea to have open, easy, transparent access to local government information. What we do with it through FIT is make it actually really useful, really intuitive. We make it hopefully in ways that allow a wide range of users to do some sort of analysis to solve problems or to start conversations. So that's what FIT is, in large part meeting that statutory requirement to collect and then republish the financial data of every government in the state. I wanted to really talk about, when we talk about telling the story of financial condition in cities, in local governments around the state, it's important to know that you want to be able to tell that story because a lot of people are listening to what that story is. And if they're not listening, they're trying to figure out that story themselves. And so understanding it if you're a local government is important because those questions may come in and you're going to want to be able to convey and understand your story so that you can explain it to somebody else. If you're from an agency or if you're somebody that's interested in that story, you're using FIT to get those answers too. And so it's important to understand how those indicators play a role. We have a lot of people use FIT every single year, from the public to the legislature to local governments themselves as they're doing analysis. Our auditors are the largest users of this data as they audit local governments. And of course, granting agencies and lenders have an increased in recent years look at this data. And so making sure that, first of all, it's right, making sure that it's telling the correct story is important because all of these people are listening and are looking at this data. Today, what we largely want to talk about are those 5 indicators, though. We really decided to go back to the basics. There's no new feature talks here. There's no brand new tools and resources that we really want to share with you. It's not the highlighted. We're not talking concepts of financial data. We just simply wanted to go back and talk about the indicators, which really were the core of what FIT was started for. They were put into place really for local governments to be able to self-assess potential risks to financial health using the very data that they submit to us. And so we really wanted to go back and just talk about informationally how those indicators play a role. To start the conversation about financial health indicators, I wanted to address this first. And it seems kind of weird to talk about the results of the indicators and how they're displayed in FIT before we actually talk about the indicators. But human nature, and Dwayne and I know this from showing fit at conferences, showing fit to council meetings, etc., that if there's colors involved, if there's exclamation points involved, if there's anything that's supposed to highlight, people's eyes go directly to those colors, to those words, and they focus on that first. So I decided we should probably just address this right up front so that when we talk about the indicators, it makes a little bit more sense and we really understand what these things mean. Indicators in FIT are presented in a couple of ways. So if you're at a government, if you're looking at a government with multiple funds, what you'll see is a group outlook, which is shown here 4 times, right? There's a group outlook good, group outlook concerning, group outlook cautionary. This shows the funds group outlook, which basically consists of those 5 indicators that we'll talk about. If you're looking at a government with a single fund, all you'll see in FIT are the individual 5 indicators. So we show indicators by fund. If you're looking at a government with multiple funds, you'll see the group outlook. Clicking on those expands the 5 indicators. But if you're just looking at a single fund government, all you'll see are the 5 indicators when you log into FIT. Hopefully that makes sense. The second thing here that we'll address is the color. The colors are meant and have always been meant to indicate, the level of attention that we wanted to bring to a user using that indicator. So, I kind of say just because it's green doesn't necessarily mean that a government doesn't have risk of weakening financial health. All it means is that it met certain requirements or is above a certain threshold, which means that the potential for certain risks is lower, but it's not gone. The same thing with concerning. It's very possible and likely for many governments to have a concerning outlook, but there isn't any, there may be a reason for it. Or there may not be an immediate need for everything to shut down and all hands on deck. Really what they're meant to show is that need to address the concern that a risk may be present. In general, though, when you look into FIT, a green outlook means that a government has met a benchmark that is set in the ratio. It's above a certain amount, above a certain threshold, etc. The yellowish color is a cautionary, which means that benchmark may still be met, but we've had a declining trend. That's generally the reason for a cautionary outlook. A concerning outlook generally means that we're below that benchmark that we've set. And an indeterminate usually means that we just don't have enough data. Potentially it's a new fund. We don't have trend information. And so we really can't give it some sort of grade. The other thing that indeterminate may indicate is that there's a measure that doesn't have a benchmark. And so we're not giving some sort of highlight of risk there because there's no set standard for which to meet. It's just informational as a measure. In FIT, any of those eyes will bring up the information that basically says what I just said. It's important for those that are looking at this data, if you're an agency, even if you're a local government, that the data presented in those colors, the words cautionary, concerning, etc., it's not a scorecard. It's important to remember this if you're researching a local government and really trying to understand that a government with a yellow in that orangish color, it doesn't receive a lesser grade or a scorecard measure in FIT than any other government. We've chosen to bypass any sort of grading system that comes along with this in FIT. Instead, we just choose to highlight that level of potential risk. The measures are just, it's just math equations based on whatever data was submitted, which leads to the importance of that data being accurate. There's questions about why did we choose those 5 measures? Why are these 5 measures being used and applied that good, cautionary, concerning? The basic answer is that we chose those indicators because those are the indicators that our auditors use. Again, it was really important when we created FIT and brought in these financial health indicators to say, if an auditor was concerned or if an auditor is using these measures to take and audit the local government, it's important for the local government to also see those measures and understand kind of what's coming. If a government can self-assess ahead of time, potentially there's not an issue when the auditor gets there and understands, the context around that measure. So that's the reason why we chose those 5. If you're a local government, remember, there's some things to do when you're looking at financial health indicators. If you log in for the very first time, whether you're somebody from finance, if you're a council member, if you're a commissioner, and you take a look at your profile and see those measures, it's important to know why the measures look like they do. The very first step that I would take and that we typically recommend is the data actually accurate? It's happened before where a local government has contacted us and said, hey, we think that these measures are wrong. We're actually in a pretty good place, but all these measures are showing cautionary and concerning, and we really don't understand that. And the answer was really, well, the measures are based on the data that we received, and there's actually something missing from that report that was submitted. Thus, the indicators are showing true, it's just showing true to the wrong data. So fixing those errors quickly resolves that and gets back to really looking at the true indicators based on the real data. So that's number one strategy to make sure that you understand those measures. The other thing to ask yourself after that is really, what factors led to these results? Knowing that the data is correct now, if we do have a cautionary, concerning, or a good measure, what led up to this? Could there have been a significant project occurring that caused cash reserves to drop? Could increased spending due to emergency had really caused a change in the type of operational expenditures that happened in a year? Did we receive a huge grant and we really boosted what we were able to do with that? And so our indicators are showing green as great. There's always other context that's applied to these that really helps understand how each indicator plays with one another. We always suggest, especially if you're a local government, know that story in case someone has questions about it, including auditors. Finally, if you're really not quite sure what to look for, we have produced resources that are available on our website that help you go through and check for the most common data issues that have affected FIT in the last couple of years. We have a work group with an SAO that really just focuses on figuring out these data issues that throw off what the public sees and what local governments see in their own data. And we've packaged all that together in a checklist to help people understand. So let me check. No questions yet. Feel free to place questions in the chat as we go. So let's now transition into talking about the indicators themselves. We're going to go through all 5, and just know that I'm not going to show math equations. I'm not going to show the theories or the sources of where these metrics came from. What I want to do is just talk about the importance of each of these measures as they exist in FIT today. I'll also try to talk about what that benchmark is and what some of those good cautionary concernings could mean as they relate to these measures. I'm going to go through these, since we're going at that high level, somewhat quickly so that we get a chance to actually dive into the measures on the live side of things. So the first measure that I want to start with is cash balance efficiency. In my own words, this is kind of the mitochondria of health indicators. For those of you that know the mitochondria, it's considered kind of that powerhouse of the cell. This, in my own words, is kind of the powerhouse of indicators. And it's not just my inclination on that. Auditors, as they go through, are instructed to place, an additional kind of emphasis or additional look or scrutiny around cash balance efficiency. And the other indicators that I'll present after this are often used in relation to cash balance efficiency. It's helpful, at least, to use them in relation to one another. And cash balance efficiency is a great one to have in relation to other indicators. And so what does this indicator do? In the simplest terms, it really comes down to this. Your funding stops. Sales can't be collected anymore in a fund. Sales tax collections of a specific type are no longer available. How long could that fund or how long could a government survive before it could figure out how to obtain additional funding, emergency funding, etc.? So an extreme scenario, but really what it boils down to is, how flexible or how able is a fund ready to adapt to changes to that operation? national standards say, well, a government or a fund should be able to operate about 60 days before it's completely out of money if that funding stops. So we use that as our benchmark. In general, this means that if a government meets this benchmark, we show a good measure. If you have 61 days, if you have 100 days, 200 days, etc., we think that's a healthy amount of cash set aside to use in those instances where funding really needs to be leveraged. Governments that fall below this measure are typically flagged as a concerning or a high level of potential risk, because if an emergency happens or some other type of spending needs to be incurred, there's a higher risk that the fund may need to incur debt or worse, some sort of bankruptcy situation, which luckily hasn't happened in quite some time. We have a caution. Remember that yellowish color, which generally typically means for this is that at some point in the future, based on trends, there's a threat that this could dip below 60 days. Let's move over to change in cash position. It's a pretty simple measure that simply takes the ending cash from last year compared to the ending cash of this year, does the math. Did you end up net positive or did you end up net negative? Historically, traditionally, if you end up with more money, it's considered good. If you end up with less money, it's considered bad. But we know that really isn't the full story. So in past years, we made some changes to how this indicator is displayed, how it flags risk. So now we know that you have a large project, you have a planned, approved project that eats into some of those savings that you may have acquired through grants or loans or et cetera. So of course your cash is going to go down as you make investments into things like infrastructure. So just because a fund goes negative in changing cash in a year is no longer really considered or flagged as a high level of risk. We know that governments aren't meant to save or to just earn money net positive in perpetuity. They're meant to provide services and make investments into those things that are important to citizens. So we decided to give it a little bit more of a flexibility here. Typically, only a government who receives a cautionary or concerning measure in changing cash are repeated years, right? 3 years or more. Now we're starting to see a trend. Well, is this fund actually just overspending and not properly funded or not properly operating? Is there some other issue here? That's when we start flagging it for that cautionary or concerning. So let's move over to general or governmental fund sustainability. So we're focusing simply on a measure that measures governmental funds. So those funds, general fund, special purpose, or special revenue fund, et cetera. It's another measure with a benchmark of greater than 0. This pretty much takes into account whether a government is, quote, living within its means, or rather is spending for traditional operational type expenditures plus debt service done within the means of what it's collecting in terms of revenue for that fund in the year. The difference between this and potentially changing cash, which was the previous measure, is that this more deals specifically with just revenues and those expenditures, whereas changing cash deals with just ending cash versus ending cash. Did cash just go up and down, rather than how was our revenues meeting the needs for spending? So there's a lot of other types of inflows other than revenues. There's a lot of other types of outflows other than expenditures. This really just focuses on revenues and expenditures.
Hey, Niles, we had
Yes.
a comment / observation from a town. I noticed on our FIT, we got cautionary because we split the water fund from the sewer fund. They are their own funds now. As well, I learned that the reserves were not reporting on the proper funds. Fixed it, but I still see it as cautionary.
Yeah, so this might be a good example of us taking a look and seeing what those, understanding what cautionary is really intended to do here. If we're just talking change in cash, there's a chance that trend, right? There's some sort of correction here that was made or a change in how these were reported. And really what might just need to happen is additional years of information so that our trends can now, properly tell that story. If a fund, a lot of times in FIT, if a fund structure changes, we don't really have right now a possibility of remapping all of that fund information unless we go back and report prior years. And so sometimes the story here is just simply, we have to wait another year until this information gets filled in. But I'd be really curious to go in and actually take a look at that information. And I know that there's periods of time after these events, and we could definitely jump on into one of those meetings or rooms and chat about that. It's a great comment and a good point to bring up. Okay, so our fourth measure, moving along, is debt load. So debt load shows users pretty much how much of the revenue that's being collected for, revenue type collections immediately go to paying off debt. If too much burden is placed on debt, it can cause stress, of course, to being able to pay for the rest of operational expenses. In theory, in a non-debt world, we would collect revenues in the amount that we need to pay expenses. But as we start to add debt payments, now we have certain amounts that are going to pay off that debt, which removes that cash from being available to pay off other types of expenses. Now, debt is a normal part of any sort of operations for local government. It's often a preferred way to get this done without taking a huge hit to your reserves, which puts you into threat for a lot of other different things. But that's not to say that going in excess of what we say here for 12% is considered healthy. I remember coming straight out of college with student loans and seeing that amount going to student loans just skimmed from the top of your paycheck. Essentially, it really leaves you with having essentially less revenue to be able to use in the ways that you'd like it to. And so that's really what this measure is trying to accomplish. For enterprise funds specifically, this is a little bit more vague and hard to determine because there historically hasn't really been a good a measure of what is appropriate amount of debt for enterprise funds, because enterprise funds have the freedom to raise their rates to deal with this in other ways, whereas governmental funds typically don't have that flexibility. They run on that simple property tax or sales tax collection, which doesn't, it's not within the government's power to really control how much is collected. So notice some difference there when you go into FIT. Finally, the last measure in FIT is enterprise self-sufficiency. It's very similar to governmental fund sustainability. It's a benchmark percentage of 0. So if you're above 0, you're green. If you're below 0, you're going to be either that cautionary or concerning. This again focuses on whether revenue collections are sufficiently covering the costs of operations and debt. So having less than 0% means that you're essentially taking money from your past efforts to save money, or in other words, you're taking from future years by spending that amount down that you may need for investing in infrastructure or for paying for emergencies, etc. So it could also mean if there's a benchmark of less than 0, that specifically for auditors may be concerned that maybe this fund is being supplemented or subsidized by additional revenues from a general fund or from some sort of tax-based fund. And so we all know that enterprise funds are intended to be business-like, run where profits can pay for those expenses and save over years. So if we see an amount that's negative here, we really start to think, well, is it not really supporting itself? Is that intended? Is that not intended? And we start to flag for potential risk when that happens. So I know that was, potentially a lot of information, a really high level though. What we want to do next is move in and have Dwayne show you some examples of how these indicators work with one another with some actual real life examples. So I will allow Dwayne to take over here. And
thanks, Niles.
There you go.
Yeah, so the goal here, Niles dropped the link to FIT in the chat box a little earlier. So if you have dual monitors, we would like you to pull up your own information and kind of follow along. If the idea of multitasking just freaks you out, then you can just watch me I will walk you through this. The whole goal of this demonstration, though, is to get you to point and click and interact with FIT. At the end of the presentation, Niles is going to share some information. If you need a little help, if you need some one-on-one hand-holding or some personalized training, we are available for that as well. And we actually do quite a bit of this. So just know, moving forward, I'm going to go through a demonstration and kind of bring home that information that Niles shared in a visual, interactive way. Follow along on your dual monitor or just watch me. So if you got to the link, this is the landing page for FIT. And I'm going to just go real quickly. On the left here, there are two options to onboard. So we're going to go ahead and find a government. And when you get to this map view, there's two choices, find on map or find by name. So you can actually click on this map and find a government. But for demonstration purposes, I'm just going to say find by name. Now, I know about half of you in attendance aren't a local government. You're either a state agency or possibly a vendor. So you can pick the government of your choice. You can pick where you live. You can pick the city where you live, etc. So just go ahead and enter a name if you've got a dual monitor. For this demonstration, we had a volunteer from the audience. And so we're going to use the town of Brewster or the city of Brewster. And thank you, Misty, for volunteering. So as you can see, I type in Brewster, and then I'm going to choose the city of Brewster. Now, some of you may have received an email from our office, I think you local governments, and in the body of that email was an example of a tear sheet or a profile. So we promised that we would show you how to generate that one pager. So look at the city of Brewster off to the right here. There's this generate tear sheet. And what this does is it creates a PDF file of overview of the town of Brewster. Okay, so if you have the need or the urge to print this out and share it with family, friends, or council commissioners or whoever, we have this nice little feature here where you can just create a one pager. So I'm gonna go ahead and close that and go back to this. So this is the profile. And I see that that's so cool. I'm not sure if that was directed towards me or to that tear sheet, but thank you, Emma, for that comment. So back to the city of Brewster. I'm just going to fly through the profile components, but remember, this session is directly about the financial health indicators. So here's the city of Brewster. You can see where they're located on the map. If you pan out, in case you've never been to Brewster, it's a great place. Some good food, been there quite a few times. Some basic information about this. Here's some revenue and expenditure data, which I encourage you to explore on your own time. And here are the financial health indicators. And I'll come back to this after I go through the profile. But the big thing here to know, like Niles said, City of Brewster is a general purpose government and they're multi-fund. So the presentation here is by fund. You see general fund, all governmental funds, they have a sewer fund and they have a water fund. If you're a special purpose district like a port or a water sewer district, you more than likely have a single fund and you're just going to see the indicators themselves. So I'll come back to this. Scrolling down a little bit more, we again have some financial information about whether things are going up or down, some little YouTube videos and some rankings, like is this city of Brewster, there's 272 in FIT, where do they rank in comparison to other cities? And then we have some donut charts on how they receive money, where does their money come from, and where does their money go functionally. And then we have some statewide averages versus what they're doing. So you get some kind of context. Okay, this is the city of Brewster, but how do they kind of compare to the rest of the state, et cetera, et cetera. So I would encourage you to spend some time in the profile, understand some of the functionality. But for this particular session, I'm going to stick to the financial health indicators. So Niles went over 5, and those 5 are kind of spread out here for a general purpose government. So we're going to just start with the general fund. So when you click on the general fund, you'll see the 3 indicators: cash balance sufficiency, change in cash, governmental fund sustainability. There are 2 more, but you onboard those slightly different. And if you're paying attention to the biology term that Niles used, do you remember which one of these three is kind of like, I think he called it the big kahuna measure. If you didn't remember, it's cash balance efficiency. So we're going to go ahead and zero in on that one first. So you go ahead and click on cash balance efficiency. And again, it's important to understand what this is showing. So off to the right here, you see the benchmark. Remember, it's greater than 60 days. Niles gave an explanation of that. So if you look at the legend, here's the 60-day benchmark. Okay. Here's the city of Brewster. And you can see back in 2020, they were at 196 days, where the benchmark is 60. Now, we've also heard from our clients that, well, that's nice. You know, we like being above the benchmark, but what are the averages and means for cities in the state of Washington? So you'll notice off here in the legend, we do show the average. So benchmark is 60, Brewster 196, the average is 348. And we also have a mean for those of you that understand that maybe this is more useful. And then that's at 229 days. So hopefully that makes sense. I think visually, this tells a little more information than just showing the benchmark. Now, one of the other things that we've heard is, well, I want to compare myself to somebody else. And so up here in the report menu, you have the ability to pick another city or town that you would like to compare yourself to. So in this case, I noticed that we had the city of Winthrop enrolled. So I'm going to go ahead and throw you in here because you're geographically close to Brewster. And we're going to show their data lined up with Brewster. So again, here's the benchmark, here's Brewster, and here's the town of Winthrop in green. So again, it gives you some kind of context on, well, what are other people doing? What are their numbers compared to ours? And it just helps with the analysis. So what I just demonstrated is the visual side of the indicator, which is this blue option. If you go to data and formula, you get to actually look at the underlying data, which for some of you is probably more important than the visual. And again, all of the math, all of the calculations, including the mean, the median, and the town of Winthrop, all of this is displayed here. And a little bit further down, even though Niles promised not to go into the formula, we do have the formula here, the meaning and the importance. So basically what we're showing you is everything that you need to know that's in this presentation is actually sprinkled around in FIT and there for you to consume. Okay, so hopefully that was useful and interesting to you. And love to walk you through this if you need more of a hand-holding approach. So I'm going to go back. On the rest of these, I'm not going to go as fast. I'm going to go faster because cash balance efficiency is the most important one in a lot of people's opinion. And the rest of these indicators are following the same kind of pattern. So change in cash. Again, I think it's just important to see where you are compared to the benchmark. So here's the benchmark, and here's Brewster, and here's the median just for show. And again, if you wanted to go to the report menu and add up here, like City of Winthrop, you can do that as well. The next one here is governmental fund sustainability. Again, very similar. The benchmark is greater than 0. The city is here, and here's the median somewhere in the middle. Okay, so that was just a real quick rundown of the first 3. Now to get to the other 2, I'm going to go ahead and go here to debt load. So this again measures the benchmark is less than 12%. The city of Brewster is right down here because it looks like they don't have any governmental debt. The median and the mean. Last thing, I'm going to go and show you, and this is where if you're a water sewer district or a special purpose district, you can kind of perk up because your look is slightly different because you don't have all this governmental activity. So if you are, a water district, so let's go ahead and take a look at City of Brewster's water fund. So this is what your landing page will more than likely look like. You're going to have the indicators, and you're going to have a grayed out debt load, because remember when Niles was talking about enterprise activity, there is no standard that we can compare you to. So all we're doing is displaying the data and not showing the benchmark. So under enterprise self-sufficiency, again, you want to be bringing in more money than you're spending. So the benchmark is down here, and the City of Brewster's information is up here above the benchmark. Okay, and I see Niles' hand on that question about debt load. So hopefully you got to see the answer to debt load.
Might it be a good idea for Niles to just address the questions that have come in and he's answering
Sure.
the chat real
Sure.
quick?
Yeah,
Sure.
Before I do that, do you want to show the all governmental funds and then the enterprise funds for debt load, just to show the differences there? So as you can see here in debt load, or in all governmental funds, we have the three indicators that were shown in the general fund plus your debt load here. Remember, the other location was within any of the individual enterprise funds, which are reporting debt load is included here as one of the four here. And you notice that in enterprise funds, the governmental sustainability is replaced with enterprise self-sufficiency. So when you're on this kind of more multi-fund view with the group outlooks, notice the indicator numbers are listed there. So general fund has 3, and the others have 4, which are combinations of all of those 5.
Okay, great. That's a great question. I'm glad you asked that. Niles, do you want to try to do a cash balance efficiency waterfall? Do you have time?
Yes.
So-
let me address one more question. There's some
Okay.
really good questions in here, and I think we still have enough time for a waterfall and
Okay.
some closeout. One of the questions was the available governments are cash basis only correct, and I addressed that one in the chat. Although this session focuses just on cash balance indicators, there's a whole other set of very similar but specifically related to gap indicators that live in the gap government's profiles. The functionality is all the same. The looks are all of the same. It's just that the equations are slightly different because they have to cater to the way that gap governments categorize and report their information, since they do present that a little bit differently than cash basis. So yes, this presentation focuses on cash, but feel free to search for those gap governments, look at the tab for why this measure is important, and you can find all the same information, but for gap governments. And then Dwayne, I don't know if you saw, but we did get a question about,
Yes.
COVID. Will COVID impact cash balance efficiency? Know that Dwayne and I absolutely love that question. It's something we've been interested in actually doing some data stories on in our Audit Connection blog at SAO. There's still a lot more analysis to do, and so many questions that could be answered easily in FIT. So if you're interested, reach out and we can actually answer that question for you.
Yeah, I'm impressed by these questions. So I'm glad you guys are following along, and I'm really, really grateful for the interaction here, because what you're asking are things that I think are why we have FIT. Especially the impact on COVID. Like Niall said, we did this pretty thorough examination on the impacts of COVID to revenues statewide. So thanks for that, Town of Meadowlane. A lot of surprises up there in that part of the state. So I'm going to go back to cash balance efficiency. And so hopefully you've got your data pulled up, your FIT profile, or if you're an agency, you've picked a government that you're interested in or where you live. And what we want to do is, again, remember the cash balance efficiency, the benchmark is 60 days. Okay, so if I'm the City of Brewster, we know in 2020, they're at 196 days. So what we're hoping to do in this next little exercise is whatever government that you've decided to pick, we want to use a waterfall comment in the chat. Type in the number of days you're noticing for cash balance efficiency in the chat box. And then we do a 3, 2, 1, and then we're all going to hit enter at the same time. And just kind of curious to see what types of numbers are going to pop up. I think that there may be some interesting observations. If you are not participating, you can just make one up. All right. So hopefully you've got cash balance sufficiency up. You've got the number of days figured out for whatever government that you've got on your screen. And go ahead and type it in. And then I'm going to do a countdown, and then we're going to waterfall this. Okay. Ready? 3, 2, 1, enter.
Those all look realistic so far, Dwayne. I was expecting somebody to put like 10,000 since you told them they could make something up.
Yes. And here's an observation that we've had over time, because you'll notice, with the exception of 82, most of the governments are well above the benchmark. And we did a presentation at the University of Washington. And one of the suggestions that they made was, well, the benchmark made up, the benchmark is too low. And our response was, well, we're not going to change the benchmark, but we're going to add median, mean, and average, so that even if you are well above the 60 days, but let's say you're below the median, there may be something to consider there moving forward, if that makes any sense. Okay, well, thank you very much. In the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and shut down the demo, and now this is going to keep going.
Yep, thank you. Yeah, that's the discussion of the benchmarks has come up a couple of times, even by people who are, data experts and researchers, that say, hey, you should bump that thing up. 60 days is pretty low. But we still think that, measuring that benchmark in relation to a statewide kind of average of health is, I think, a better benchmark. It provides this, a good sense of, well, how healthy are other cities? Are we in line with others, even if we're above this benchmark? So, feel free to jump in there and check out that mean and median compared to your government for all the indicators, and really see where you line up and fit. It's interesting to see. Okay, so we've got about 10 minutes left here. We want to leave a few questions some time for questions if we need to. What I want to do, and what we've kind of gone through and just shown you, is 5 separate indicators, their importance, what they tell you, how they stand on their own, etc. But this session is really about telling a story. And so what we really need to do is talk about how these indicators work together, how they work in relation to one another, and how additional context really helps play out that story. But just like any story, you have to read chapters 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 in order to understand how this book really ends. And sometimes there's a cliffhanger at the end and you're not really sure, and that's okay. So, when I started thinking about this, let me see here, there we go. It's kind of like, one indicator is great, but if we add the rest, we have kind of this balanced meal. And since it's getting close to stuffing time, and I'm a big fan of stuffing, I just got hungry and put this on here. So there we go. Okay, so let's give an example. We told you that cash balance efficiency kind of acts as probably the most standalone measure of financial health. At least there's a lot of emphasis placed on, we should really look at this measure and see how it turned out. If cash balance efficiency is good, what are other other ratios in relation? Or I may say at the opposite, if other ratios are showing some sort of highlight of potential risk, what is cash balance efficiency saying? How is that resulting in the amount of cash that ultimately this government is ending up with? Because I think a lot of times what we think is, year-to-year operations change, but what's potentially the most important is that there's still cash in the bank for us to use in case of emergencies and such. So let's set up this first scenario. We have cash balance efficiency, which is good. We're showing just fine, but our change in cash position is flagging us. It's saying, hey, there's something going on here. It's cautionary. We're overspending. And so this tells one story, right? We're overspending. Is this, potentially there's some questions that need to be asked here to really understand. Was the overspending due to some sort of planned investment? Sure, that's likely. Was it due to that emergency that occurred? Sure, maybe. In this sense, we're still showing that we have that 60-day benchmark met for adequate cash. And so you can start to put this puzzle together that, well, we just need those answers as to why to really understand, but maybe we're okay going forward. There's nothing else to do because we understand those reasons why we're spending more in recent years. But definitely it's still being flagged as something to keep in mind. Let's look at the opposite. Now we have the cash balance efficiency, which is showing as a orangish red color for concerning, which means that we're below that 60-day benchmark for amount of cash that we hold. But our change in cash position is green. It's been negative in years, but we have this big jump in the current year. You can tell that this tells a different story. There's some questions again that need to be asked to understand whether you're a local government or whether you're somebody who's interested in that local government. What's that plan to increase their cash reserves to get over to that 60 days? Is that change in cash, which is green this year, is that a one-off thing? Are they turning that reserve amount around, or is there some other story here that needs to be uncovered? Is that change in cash going to dip negative again and keep us under that 60 days? Having the answers and understanding where it goes from here is oftentimes more important than just simply the colors or the measures here. So you can see we flip these around and they tell drastically different stories, but ultimately there's questions here that need to be asked in order for yourself to really get that well-balanced meal. So the takeaway, indicators, just like any other dashboard, just like any other metric, are just based on the underlying data. They don't represent issues. They simply highlight the fact that the data is failing to meet certain benchmarks or requirements, which typically need to have some sort of attention brought to it. Several reasons why a green indicator may be good. Several reasons why a green indicator may not actually mean that government is healthy, but we need to really understand how these all play together to help construct that story. If cash balance efficiency is green, everything else is showing as some sort of concerning measure. Maybe it should be talked about at a local government as to, making sure that we do remain, that those other yellows and concernings aren't trends in the wrong direction, but rather planned sort of investments, or at least you have a plan to turn those around so that you don't fail to meet that benchmark of 60 days in the future, etc. Auditors are largely concerned with the what's next portion of financial health indicators. As with any audit, we're generally looking at information which is 6 months old by the time that we look at it. Similarly, in FIT, you want to make sure that you understand that what's next. Auditors will often ask, an indicator showing cautionary concerning, what's happened since, what's happening this year, what's happening next year, what will it look like next year? Having those answers ready as a local government, whether you're conveying them to a lender, conveying them to a grantor, conveying them to council, conveying them to anybody who has some sort of interest in it, is going to be really important. I want to leave everybody, there's 3 here. This session's only an hour. There's a lot in FIT, and as you can see, there's a lot of potential things to understand and learn about FIT. We hope that what we've shared so far is really high level understanding of, if you just want to look at financial health indicators, what those look like. If you want to go from here on your own and learn a little bit more about FIT, in our resource database, we have a 15-minute FIT guide, which is a 15-minute tutorial showing you how to access your own data. Dwayne talked about, reaching out to us if you have interest to just chat about FIT, to have a kind of a one-on-one presentation about specific aspects of FIT that you might want to know more about. Just know that, we've held quite a few of these. We call them personal training sessions. We held them with council members. We've held them in open public meetings, hold them just over Teams or Skype calls. And we talk about whatever your interest is, 30 minutes to an hour, whatever you want to have time for. Dwayne or I will just sit and chat with you and answer your questions and hopefully get you the data that you need to make decisions. The last thing, don't forget to check out all of the different resources that we publish on our Digital Audit Connection, which is our blog at SAO. Some of those questions about did COVID affect the finances of local governments in our state, we've actually attempted to answer some of those questions, or at least provide you with data and some guidance to find those answers within FIT. FIT or data definitely tells a story as long as somebody has the questions in their mind and they know where to find the data. And we think that data is in FIT. So we have about 4 minutes left, which I think is perfect amount of time to address any other questions that are outstanding. And if not, just know that we do have contact information here, especially that email, which is most important, center@sao.wa.gov. That'll get you to our team. That's how you can sign up for personal training sessions. That's how you can get resources, whatever you need from our office in terms of resources and tools. That's where you go.
Hey, Niles, there's a question from Cindy. Is there a way to see historical trends and data in the same format?
Yes.
Yes.
And I think what's being referred to there is, are we still talking financial health indicator historical trends? Do you still have FIT up? Do you want to share?
Yes, sure.
Okay.
So yeah, like Niall says, it kind of depends on whether or not you're talking about the financial indicators themselves or whether or not you're just looking at the revenue expenditure trend data.
Sounds like we're talking financial health indicators.
Okay, so I still have the town of Medellin up here. And so you can see it's a 5-year trend for this particular measure. So I think that's what you're asking. If you're asking, how can this be exported? We're working on that to get you kind of a data dump. But right now, this particular SNP shows that 5-year trend.
I'll add that in that report menu, depending on your confidence and how far the data goes back, you can change the amount of years presented here. In addition, I actually, until we have that export functionality for the actual data itself in the data tab, I've actually found success in that. If you go to the data tab, Dwayne, I've actually found success in simply highlighting and copying that into Excel, and Excel will actually put it into its own separate rows and columns. Excel is pretty good at doing that. So if you want to do your own analysis or potentially tweak these numbers, that's a great way to do it.
Yep, so that looks like she's happy with that answer. The last thing I just wanted to show is, if you notice this big blue button right down here, if you actually want to look at all the statewide numbers for your particular government, that's how you would actually look at a global view. So, and that's a lot of data, so it's probably not going to finish loading by the time we're done with this presentation.
Awesome, thanks, Dwayne.
Yep. Go ahead and go back to the contact information.
All right, here that should be showing one last time. Last thing from Dwayne and I, loved hanging out with you today. Thanks for choosing us as your session from 11:30 to 12:30. Thanks for being good advocates for good government and who you work for. We're hoping to be that delivery mechanism for good data that you can use to get all your questions answered. So we really appreciate you guys being interested. Mm-hmm. And thanks to IACC for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.